When I heard something crack under my saw, my breath caught in my throat because I realized it wasn't wood at all. It was life, buried deep under the snow. That morning felt so ordinary at first. The forest was silent, heavy with fresh snow, the kind of silence that presses into your ears until even your own heartbeat sounds too loud. I was working as I had 1,000 times before. I'm a logger, 50 years old, hands ruined by the cold and the weight of an axe, back bent by years of lifting more than I should have. I came out there just to do my job, to cut, to load, to bring timber down the mountain. Nothing more. But then the earth itself seemed to cry. At first it was just a hollow sound, a crunch that didn't belong. My saw jerked and skipped, and before I understood what had happened, the snow under my boots sank a little. Then came a low rumble, so deep it seemed to rise from the ground. I thought it was my imagination, or maybe the echo of the saw. But then I froze, because the rumble turned into a growl, not just a growl, a roar. The snow in front of me shifted, cracked open like a wound, and what crawled out of that whiteness was not supposed to be awake. A bear, not just a bear, a mother bear, her fur crusted with ice, her breath exploding into clouds of steam, and behind her, pressed to her body, something small and helpless. A cube. My blood went cold. My first thought was simple and brutal. I destroyed her den. She stood taller than any man, her massive head turning toward me. I had heard stories all my life, of men torn apart in seconds, of bones broken like twigs. And looking at her then, I knew each of those stories could be true. My saw slipped from my hands into the snow. The silence that followed was worse than the roar. Her eyes met mine, dark, burning, endless. And in that moment, I felt not like a man standing in front of an animal, but like a trespasser standing before a judge. She knew what I had done. She knew I had ripped open her winter shelter, shattered her safety, put her cub in danger. The cub whimpered, pressing closer into her fur, and she let out another roar, louder this time, chest shaking, primal. My knees nearly gave way. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My boots were nailed to the ground by fear and guilt. I thought, this is it. She's going to kill me, and I deserve it. But she didn't move. She didn't charge. She didn't leap. She stayed between me and her cub, her massive body curved protectively, her teeth bared, but her paws frozen. It was as if she was holding back. The seconds dragged out like hours. My breath was ragged. My heart slammed so hard I could taste blood in my mouth. I expected her to lunge any moment. Yet all she did was stare. That stare cut through me deeper than claws could have. It was hatred, yes, but also something heavier, older, something I can only call knowing. I whispered out loud, though I don't know why. I'm sorry. My voice cracked. The bear's ears twitched. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to listen. The cub gave a tiny cry, high-pitched and desperate, and the mother bear bent down to nudge it with her muzzle. I should have taken that moment to back away, to save myself. But I didn't. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on hers again when she raised her head. There was a message in that stare, though I had no words for it. I thought she would finally come for me then. My muscles tensed, braced for pain, but she didn't. Instead, she pressed her cub closer to her body, slowly lowered herself back down into the ruined den, and never took her eyes off me. Her chest rose and fell with heavy, furious breaths, but she didn't move to kill me. She stayed, watching, guarding, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, seconds, minutes, maybe forever. The forest held its breath with me. Finally, the cold seeped into my bones and forced me to shiver. That tiny movement felt like a sin, like an insult. Her head lifted higher, and I thought, now she'll come. But once again, she didn't. I thought she was going to rip me apart. I was sure of it. My death was standing right in front of me, claws glinting, teeth shining in the gray light. And then, nothing. She just stayed there, her cub pressed against her, her eyes burning into me with something I will never, ever forget. I thought that moment was the end, but I didn't know. Nature was only beginning to show me what it had prepared. The growl came again, so deep it rattled my ribs, but she didn't lunge. Not yet. Her jaws opened wide, fangs dripping with frosted breath, the kind of sight that freezes blood, and every nerve in my body screamed that the next second would be my last. But instead of leaping at me, she lowered her head and shifted her massive body over the cub. She wrapped herself around it in a way I hadn't expected, like a shield, like a fortress made of fur and muscle. The sound of her breath filled the clearing, a ragged storm, but her paws stayed planted, her body curved protectively. She wasn't thinking about me. She was thinking about her child. That broke something in me. I had always heard bears were merciless, blind with rage, driven only by instinct to attack anything that threatened them. But here she was, putting herself between me and that tiny, whimpering life. She wasn't just a beast. She was a mother. My own chest tightened. My hands trembled so hard I couldn't even wipe the sweat that stung my eyes. I tried to lift one boot, to step back, but the snow seemed to hold me in place. My heart pounded so violently it felt like it might break my ribs. I kept waiting for the rush, the strike, the tearing claws. But the moment stretched, unbearable, endless. Then she looked at me, really looked. Her eyes locked onto mine, and it was like a current shot through me, like she was searching my face for something more than just fear. Her gaze was dark, deep, almost human in its weight, and for one insane second, I thought she could see the guilt pouring off me. She wasn't just warning me, she was judging me. She looked at me like I was both her enemy and her judge. I whispered later, but in that moment, I could barely breathe. The silence pressed down so heavily that I felt dizzy. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the air between us, each one catching the gray light like sparks, as if even the forest was holding its breath. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg. The words jammed in my throat. What could I possibly say? I didn't mean to. It was an accident. None of it mattered to her. All she knew was that her world had been broken open, and the man who did it was standing right there. She rumbled again, a sound more terrifying for how restrained it was, as if she was holding back a storm behind her teeth. The cub wriggled beneath her, squeaking, and she lowered her muzzle to hush it with a gentle nudge. My heart twisted at the sight. The same mouth that could crush bone was soft against her baby. I stood shaking, ashamed, afraid, unable to move. Seconds crawled like hours. Every blink felt like a risk, every heartbeat like a countdown. My palms burned from clenching into fists so tight my nails cut the skin. My whole body was telling me to run, but my soul was chained to her eyes. And in those eyes I saw something that made me shudder more than fear ever could. Recognition, as if she understood not just the danger, not just the destruction, but me. As if she could read that I wasn't there to kill her or her cub. As if she saw the guilt, the weakness, the smallness of the man in front of her. I swallowed hard. The sound loud in the frozen air, and she twitched her ears. A warning, a reminder that one wrong step would change everything. The cub gave another cry, and she tightened her body over it. Snow fell from her shoulders as she shifted. Her breath steamed out in heavy bursts. She didn't blink. Neither did I. I thought my heart couldn't take any more. I thought the weight of that stare, that terrible silence, would crush me right where I stood. And I truly believed, in that moment, that it was the end. I thought, this is how it finishes. She's about to tear me apart, and I will never take another breath. But I was wrong. I thought this was the end. But it turned out, nature was only beginning to show me what it had prepared. I edged backward one slow step, then another, the snow groaning under my heels. My breath came in short clouds, like the forest was counting each one. I thought if I just gave her space, if I made myself smaller, this would end here and now. I thought she would take her cub and vanish into the dark trees, and I'd be left with my shame and a story I'd never tell. But nature had a different plan, and I felt it before I understood it. She didn't follow. She didn't lift a paw. She lowered herself, huge and careful, and folded her body over the cub again, tucking it into the heat of her chest. It was the same motion I had watched my wife make long ago when our boy cried in the night. Arms gathering, head bending, breath slowing to calm him. The sight punched straight through me. She wasn't coming for me. She was showing me, look at what you did. Look at what matters. My legs wanted to run. My spine told me to turn and go, to live and live with it. But something in my chest wouldn't move. I stood there shivering, trapped between the cowardice that would save me and the guilt that rooted me to the spot. The metal teeth of the saw lay at my feet, dull in the gray light. And I hated the thing more than I have ever hated anything. The cub whimpered, a thin, high sound, not the soft little mew from before. This one had edges. It sharpened until it wasn't a cry anymore, but a kind of squeal, frantic and wet. Snow at the lip of the den slumped again, a slow settling like a breath held too long. I saw then how the roof of that winter tunnel had cracked when my blade bit. What I thought was only a scrape was a wound. The weight above was pressing down. The cub's sound stuttered. I heard a tiny hitch, like it was trying to pull air that wasn't there. My stomach flipped. I knew that sound. Anyone who's ever listened to an animal struggle for air knows it. Panic. Not just fear. Panic. The mother's head lifted. She looked at me. And then she did something I did not know a bear could do. She opened her mouth and made a sound that wasn't a threat. It wasn't a roar that chased or broke. It was lower, rounder, almost hollow, like a call sent into a cave. It vibrated through the snow and through me. There was pleading in her roar, and my eyes stung. She dropped her muzzle to the drift and used her claws to scrape at the edge, not to dig an attack line toward me, but to pull snow away from a narrow gap near the collapsed rim. She did it gently, like she was trimming a cradle. Every scrape sent a small slide of powdery crystals down into the dark, and the cub's squeal changed, like it caught a sliver of air and then lost it again. I stared, breathing too fast. My mind tried to split in two. One part told me to step back into the trees and vanish, to leave this to the wild, to accept what I had already ruined and save what was left of me. The other part, loud as a hand on my shoulder, said I couldn't, not after watching her show me where it hurt, not after hearing that sound. I whispered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. The cold bit into my lips. She looked up at the sound of my voice, and the whole forest tilted. Her eyes were not soft, not forgiving, but they were not the eyes of something blind with rage either. They were the eyes of a mother who had measured what was in front of her and made a choice. Protect first, punish later, if at all. She scraped again, carefully, as if to say, here is where you broke it. Here is where we breathe. The cub's squeal became a cough, thin and awful. I felt the back of my throat tighten, a taste of iron, the old aftertaste of fear. I bent to pick up the saw and then stopped, horrified at myself. The machine, the noise, the teeth. No, the idea of it near that den made me want to gag. I pushed the saw aside with my boot until it disappeared into a powder drift. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to clench them to keep my fingers from buzzing. I could see my breath and hers mixing in the air between us, two ghosts weaving and fading. Every time the cub coughed, the ghosts twitched. I crouched a little and she tensed, a tremor in her shoulders like a drawn bow. I froze. She watched. The muscle in her jaw flickered. The cub's cough broke into a silence so sudden It hit like a slap. No sound, no squeal, no breath. God, I said, or maybe I only thought it. The mother made the call again, that hollow, pulling sound, and pressed her foreleg a fraction to the side, opening the narrowest wedge of space at the rim. She didn't step away from the cub. She didn't leave the entrance. She showed me an angle, a chance as thin as a twig. The world narrowed to that dark slit and the hot fog of her breath. I could feel the weight of the snow like a hand on the back of my neck. If I misstepped, if I collapsed the lip, that would be it. If I did nothing, maybe that would be it too. My heart slammed. My teeth ached with the cold. I stood. I took one step forward, then stopped and closed my eyes. I saw my own son, tiny and red-faced, a lifetime ago. I saw my wife's hands cupping his head, soft and sure. When I opened my eyes, the bear was still there, her gaze pinned to mine, steady and terrible, and asking. I told myself to go. I told myself to turn around and walk away, to leave wild to wild. I decided to leave. But something stopped me. I don't know what made me turn back. Maybe it was the silence after that last awful cough. Maybe it was the way she held herself over the darkness like a roof that was barely holding. All I know is that my legs moved before my courage did, and I found myself stepping toward the shattered mouth of the den. I heard my own voice in my head saying, "What are you doing?" And I answered it with nothing. I couldn't believe I was doing this. I couldn't believe she was letting me. She didn't charge. She didn't even faint. She watched me with those steady, burning eyes and shifted just enough to make a narrow space beside her shoulder. It wasn't an invitation, not in any human sense, but it wasn't a refusal either. I took one more step, then knelt, my knees soaking through with meltwater. The snow stung my bare wrists where my gloves rode up. My hands were clumsy stones. I started to pull at the snow and broken brush with my fingers, scooping it backward in little piles, feeling for the buried branches I'd knocked loose when the roof gave. The stuff near the top was light and dry, but underneath it turned heavy, packed, the kind of weight that swallows your arms up to the elbow. Every handful I cleared made the gap look worse, not better, like I was shaving a wound that kept widening. She stood so close I could hear the soft rasp of her tongue as she licked a patch of frozen fur on her foreleg. When she breathed out, it was warm, and that warmth reached the back of my neck. That was the moment the fear nearly took me. Her breath, right there, a living furnace at my spine. It felt like having the ocean stand up behind me. One move. That's all it would take. I didn't turn around. I spoke instead, low and steady, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "I'm just clearing a path," I murmured, though she didn't need my words to know. "I'm making room." My voice shook on the last word. She didn't answer with a growl. She didn't answer at all. I dug. I found a thick branch wedged crosswise and eased it out, then another, and the sound it made when it scraped free set my teeth on edge. The snow above the opening sagged just a hair, and I froze with my hands inside the cold mouth. The cub made a sound then, weak, thin, like a flute someone was breaking. I felt the noise more than I heard it, a vibration in the snow against my fingertips. "Easy," I said to both of us. My breath smoked into the hole. I scraped with my gloves, then bare fingers when the glove seams caught. The cold burned them slick and bright. The den smelled like wet earth and animal, a dense, honest smell that drowned the gas and oil that clung to my clothes. She stepped once, just a quick adjustment of weight, and every nerve in my body screamed. Her shadow flowed over my hands, claws big as my thumbs set into the snow beside my wrist, close enough that I could see the dull lines where they had chipped at ice all winter. She didn't strike. She pressed down on the outer edge of the rim, firm and deliberate, like a carpenter bracing a beam. The opening widened a finger's width. I swear it did. I swear she knew. I pulled away a slab of packed snow the size of my boot, and suddenly the den exhaled. A thin rush of cold air breathed past my knuckles, and from inside came a scrabble and that small, desperate sound again, this time with air behind it. The cub. Alive. "Come on, little one," I whispered, and my eyes blurred from more than the wind. I reached in farther than I should have, feeling nothing, and then feeling fur, softer than I expected, soaked with melt, trembling like a trapped bird. I didn't grab. I flinched back from my own instinct. I only cleared around it, pulling the heavy stuff away from its head, away from its mouth. The mother bent low, and I felt her breath roll over my arm. My skin went hot and cold at once. The cub wriggled, coughed, and I cleared a last fist of snow from the lip. It nosed forward, little paws paddling in slow motion, until one paw broke into the gray light. My heart punched. Another paw, a muzzle slick with ice crystals. I swallowed a sound that might have been a sob. I made space with my hands and then got out of the way. She slid forward with a grace that didn't belong to something so huge and closed her jaws around the loose skin of the cub's neck as gently as a mother carrying a sleeping child. No teeth showed, no growl. She lifted it free and hauled it against her chest, and the cub blinked at me with gummy eyes before it tucked itself under her chin. Alive, breathing, warm. My face felt suddenly wet, and I realized the heat streaking down my cheeks wasn't from the bear's breath anymore. I wasn't prepared for tears. They came without warning, burning hot in the cold air. I covered my mouth with my numbed hand and let out a broken laugh that was really a sob. I was shaking so hard my teeth knocked together. She turned her head and looked at me over the mound of her child. Not for long, not with any softening I could name, but there was measure in it. There was knowing. For a heartbeat, I felt something impossible, like I had been weighed and just for that moment, not found wanting. She watched me as if I were hers to spare, or not. I backed away one step, then another, leaving the entrance open and clean. My hands stung like they'd been skinned. I wanted to collapse right there in the snow. I wanted to laugh and pray at the same time. I had seen a wild thing hold back its rage to save what mattered most, and I had been allowed to help. The truth of that pressed on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought it would end there. I thought I had done the only good thing I was ever going to do in that clearing, that the story would close with a living cub and a man who learned his lesson. I thought that was all. But the animal had more to show. She lifted the cub with that soft grip on the loose skin of its neck and backed away from the torn mouth of the den. Step by careful step, she moved to a cleaner patch of snow beneath the low branches of a spruce. She set the cub down there and pressed her muzzle to its side, testing the rise and fall, measuring the shiver. The little body tucked closer to her leg and made a tired, hiccuping sound that broke me open all over again. I stayed where I was, hands burning from the cold, throat hot with the kind of breath you take after a long run. I didn't trust my knees. I didn't trust my luck. I didn't trust anything. I only watched her gather her child against her chest and feel its weight, as if to say, "Here is what still lives." Then she turned. She left the cub tucked behind her foreleg and faced me full on. No rush, no roar. She straightened until her back looked level and her neck lifted like a heavy branch. Snow shook loose from her coat. She took one step toward me, only one. The world tilted. I went still in a way that felt deeper than freezing. It felt like the kind of stillness you find in a church when the door closes. My heart didn't stop, but each beat arrived as a single hard knock. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't lower my eyes. I had the sense that either one would be wrong, so I stayed as I was and let her come that single step closer. She did not open her mouth. She did not show her teeth. She only looked at me. She looked down the length of my life, or that is how it felt, and then she found me where I stood. The stare was heavy. It had weight. It pressed at my chest like a hand. It was not kindness, and it was not cruelty. It was measure. I wanted to speak, but my voice was a broken thing. The best I could do was hold her gaze. I had heard my whole life that you never lock eyes with a wild animal. I did not have a choice. I could not look away if I tried. Her eyes were a dark brown that almost swallowed the light, yet inside them lived a shine I can only call knowing. It was like looking across a river and seeing yourself in water you cannot touch. In her eyes was a gratitude I could not bear, I would tell myself later, but that day I did not have words. I only had the burn of tears I refused to let fall and the truth of a feeling I could not fit inside my ribs. Gratitude did not sit easy in me. I had caused the harm. I had made the wound. Yet her gaze did not crush me with blame. It held me upright long enough to feel the weight of what I had tried to mend. She blinked, slow. It felt like permission to breathe. I drew air and tasted spruce and cold iron and wet fur. The cub squeaked behind her leg, and her ear flicked toward the sound, and then she brought her attention back to me, as if to finish the thing we had started in that clearing. I was not brave. I was simply there, but something in me lifted its head, like an animal that has been hidden a long time. I squared my shoulders without meaning to. I let my empty hands hang open. I let her see that I had put the saw away under the snow. I let her see that the only sharp thing left in me was sorrow. I do not know how long we stood like that. Time in the winter woods has a different shape. It stretches and it snaps. It goes quiet and then hammers. I remember the sound of a branch letting go its snow with a soft thump. I remember a jay calling far off, once and then again. I remember the steam of her breath rising and fading between us, like messages written in air and erased as soon as they were read. A gust came off the ridge and pushed a sheet of dry crystals across the ground, so light they hissed. The snow passed over my boots and folded around her paws, and when it settled, I saw the print she had left with that one step, an enormous, perfect shape, the size of a dinner plate, set near enough to my boot that I could place my hand in the space between. I did not dare, but I felt the distance in my bones. Not much, enough, a line and not a wall. I had the strangest sensation then, one I still cannot explain without sounding like a fool. I felt seen, not just watched, not just targeted, not just spared, seen, like the animal had put my face on a shelf in whatever place inside her holds the shapes of danger and safety and the thin land between. I felt, in that one long stare, that she would remember me. The cub peeped again, a small, worried sound, and she turned her head a fraction to check it. When she looked back at me, the weight in her gaze had shifted. It was still heavy, but some of the heat had drained away. What remained was not forgiveness. It was something colder, older, and somehow more merciful. Recognition. You did this. You tried to fix it. We are not the same as we were an hour ago. My shoulders sagged. The tears I had been holding slid hot over cold skin. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall because there was no hiding left to do. I had seen my end in her eyes, and then, impossibly, I had seen my reprieve. The blow I braced for never came. Instead, there was this, a look that laid me bare, and then left me standing. I thought that was where we would part. I thought the next beat would be simple. She would turn, gather her child, and vanish into the spruce, and I would be a man alone with a hole in the snow and a hole in his chest. I thought we had reached our quiet agreement and our clean goodbye. I thought that was that. But she surprised me again. She didn't leave, not right away. She settled beside the cub like a boulder easing into place, then turned her head and fixed me with that same heavy stare. The little one burrowed under her foreleg, a soft shiver of life against all that muscle, and still she kept her gaze on me, as if to say, "Watch, remember, learn." I felt it as clearly as if she'd spoken. I was being measured, not just spared, not just tolerated, tested. My throat tightened. My fear didn't drain away. It mixed with something stranger that rose in my chest like warm water. I was afraid, and I believed at the same time. I believed there was a right way to stand here, a right way to breathe, a right way to be a man in front of this mother, and I was terrified I would miss it. She nosed the cub, checked its breath, then lifted her chin toward me again. Her eyes were old in a way that had nothing to do with years. The look was not mercy and not warning. It was instruction. She shifted her weight and, with a deliberate motion, used the outer edge of her paw to shave a thin ridge of snow away from the den's lip, clearing a shallow channel. It wasn't random scratching. It was the exact move she'd shown me before, the one that let air run. She did it once, twice, slow enough that I could see each grain slide. Then she stopped and stared. Do you understand? That's what it felt like. I nodded before I thought better of it. A tiny, foolish human nod, as if she needed my agreement. She blinked once, and for a heartbeat I felt relief flood through me so fast my knees went loose. The cub gave a little grunt and settled deeper into her chest, and I exhaled, long and uneven. She rose then. She rose with a single gathering of muscle, up and up until she stood higher than any man, her chest wide, her paws hanging loose and heavy. The sound that came next wasn't the ripping roar I'd heard when the den first broke open. It was fuller, rounder, a call that seemed to climb the trees and slide along the frozen bark. It wasn't for me. It wasn't against me. It was a statement that filled the clearing. We are here. We endured. This is ours. I felt it in my ribs like the first strike of a drum. She showed me strength, and inside that strength was wisdom. When she dropped back to all fours, the snow settled around her ankles like water around a keel. She took 3 slow steps in a curve, not toward me, but past me, her shoulder brushing the air close enough that the heat of her moved across my face. I held still. Every tendon in me sang. She circled to the windward side of the den and raked her claws down the trunk of a spruce, not a frantic tearing, but a clean, tall mark that lifted long strips of bark. Sap shone amber where the wood opened. The scent hit me a second later. Sharp, resin-sweet, a boundary, a record, a lesson. She turned back and watched me again, as if to see whether I would flinch at the sound or the smell, whether I would break and run. I didn't. Not because I was brave, but because I felt nailed to the moment. The cub mewed, and she answered with a sound that was almost a hum deep in her chest. Then, this is the part that shook me most, she turned slightly away from me and lay down to let the cub nurse. To show your back to a man with hands like mine is either foolishness or faith. I don't think there was anything foolish about her. The cub fastened, small jaws working, and the rhythm of it calmed the air. I listened to snow sift off high branches somewhere up the slope. I heard my own breath, slower now, a little steadier. I watched a ribbon of steam wind up from the cub's nose and vanish. I didn't move. She kept me in the narrow corner of her attention like a nail you track with your thumb while you hammer. A sudden wind slid down the ridge and rattled the spruce crowns. She stood again, not rushed, not alarmed, and faced into it. She opened her mouth and rumbled low, a sound I felt in the soles of my feet. I realized she'd placed herself between the wind and the cub, as if to shield it from the breath of the mountain itself. Then she looked at me over her shoulder, and the message in that look struck home like a tool finding the seam in a log. This is what it means to stand where you should. This is how to hold your ground without breaking anything that matters. I swallowed hard. I see. I whispered, though the words were small compared to the thing in my chest. She moved once more, and the movement turned the world inside out. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the wet shine on her whiskers, close enough that I could count the white tips of the guard hairs on her muzzle. She sniffed, a long draw that gathered the story of me from my coat, my gloves, my skin, gas and oil and iron, pine pitch, fear, sweat edged with shame. Her breath washed my cheek, and every memory I'd ever had of a warning bell rang all at once. Still, she didn't strike. She let the breath out and set her paw down in the snow between my boots, not touching, not claiming, just placing an enormous print where I could not miss it. Then she lifted her head and met my eyes. The weight of that look allowed no lies. I straightened without meaning to, and something in me, some stubborn, hidden piece, came forward to be counted. The cub whimpered again, and the moment loosened. She turned, and I thought, with a dizzy wash of relief, that we had reached the end of whatever trial I had been enduring. She had shown me what she wanted to show. I had stood without running. The lesson was given. The test was done. I told myself, this is it. The story ends here. She'll take her child and fade into the dark trees, and I'll go home a different man with a secret that will keep me quiet for years. I decided it was over, but then she did the impossible. She gathered the cub again by the loose skin of its neck and stepped away from the torn mouth of the den. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if each paw found its place by memory. She passed the spruce I'd leaned on and headed into the darker trees, the cub dangling lightly, the small paws curled inward. I felt the pull to follow and the pull to stay. The two ropes crossed in my chest and tightened until my breath came thin. She went only a little distance before she stopped. The forest swallowed sound. Then she turned her head over her shoulder and looked back at me. Not long, long enough. The look struck me like a hand laid flat against my sternum. I felt something loosen inside me that had been a knot since the first roar. I felt forgiven, or something close to it, and the surprise of that nearly dropped me to my knees. She turned forward and moved on. I watched her path and saw what I should have seen earlier. The prints did not weave like a nervous animal fleeing. They were straight, wide, evenly spaced, a line cut through powder so clean it looked carved. Where the snow was deep, she lifted high and set each paw down with the same weight, as if she meant to leave a clear road that even a clumsy man could follow. It hit me all at once. She wasn't just leaving, she was showing. I took a step, then another, careful to place my boots in the untouched space between her prints, careful not to crush the edges of what she had made. The air shifted colder as the trees thickened. A thread of wind ran down the slope and brought the smell of water and old leaves. She paused at a stand of birch and set the cub down in a dish of snow, then turned her muzzle to the ground and breathed long and slow, testing something I could not name. Her ear flicked back toward me, not warning, not invitation, simply taking note. I stopped where I was, my hands open, my chest aching with the effort of being small. She moved again, angling toward a low place where the hill curled into a shallow draw. On one side lay a windbreak of fallen trunks, moss-slick and half-buried, their roots torn up like ribs. On the other side, a bank rose gently, draped with young firs whose branches swept the ground and made a kind of green skirt. It was quiet there in a way the rest of the forest wasn't, the wind folding over the top and passing on. She stood in that pocket and lifted her nose, feeling the air. Then she looked back at me a second time. I understood only the edges of what I was seeing, but the center was clear. She was choosing a home. She set the cub down beneath the sweep of a fir and began to work. Not frantic, not random. She pulled snow with the hook of her claws, not toward the cub but away from it, clearing a shallow basin in the lee of the log where the ground would hold heat and the wind would slide by. She tested the earth with her forepaws, pressing, releasing, pressing again, as if reading the buried shape. She reached under the fallen trunk and drew out a mat of dead needles, shook them loose, and pushed them into the basin with small, neat shoves of her wrist. The cub, wobbling on unsteady legs, climbed onto the new bed and turned once, then twice, and sank into it with a sigh that felt like a string inside me settling. I stood with my mouth open, useless as a post, and the tears came again, hot, foolish, unstoppable. She showed me her new home, as if she entrusted me with a secret. The words I could have spoken were wrong for the place. So I said nothing. I only watched as she packed the windward side higher, building a lip to turn the flow, then left a low slot at the downslope edge where air could move. It was the same thought she had made me understand at the ruined den. A life like that needs breath. She carved that breath into the snow with the skill of someone who had learned from bitter nights and older winters. A jay scolded somewhere upslope, sharp and blue. She turned her head and stared into the white distance until the sound drifted away. Then, to my surprise, she stepped past the nest and came a few strides closer to me, not close enough to touch, close enough that I could see her chest lift and fall. She lowered her head and drew in a long breath, gathering my scent one more time as if to stamp it onto whatever place inside her holds the map of danger and mercy. Then she let the breath go and turned back to the fur and the small, warm body waiting there. I did not move while she settled the cub and curled around it, her spine a dark wall against the pale drift. She tucked her muzzle along the little one's side and closed her eyes for the first time since the snow broke. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. I felt like a man standing on the threshold of a door that had opened just enough for him to glimpse a room he had no right to see. I backed away a single step, then another, putting space between my breath and theirs. I did not want to take even a hair's width of heat from that pocket. I looked once more at the prints she had left and knew I would never forget their exact distance, their calm, their purpose. I had come to that clearing a man who cut first and thought later. I was leaving it a man who could read a little of what the snow was saying. I told myself I would turn and go. I told myself I would never see her again, not in this life. I thought the mountain had closed its hand over her and her child, and that my part was done. I thought so, but it wasn't. 3 days later, maybe 4, the kind of days that blur when you don't sleep right, I went back. I told myself it was to check windfall on the north slope, to measure a string of trunks I'd flagged before the storm. I told myself a man has a job, and work is a good excuse to set your feet where your heart wants to go. Truth is, I walked the ridge until the trees I knew by scars showed up like old neighbors, and then I let the mountain choose my path. The forest had a softer sound than before, the cold had eased a hair, and the snow had skinned over with a thin crust that whispered under my boots. I stopped at the edge of the shallow draw, the quiet pocket with the fallen trunks and the firs that draped the ground like green tents. I didn't step in. I only stood there, hat in my hand, feeling foolish and bareheaded in the pale light. That was when I heard it. Not the ripping roar from the day the den broke, not the chest-splitting alarm that shakes your bones. A different call, full, deep, steady. The same voice, but speaking another word. It rolled through the trees and folded back on itself. It didn't chase me. It didn't warn me off. It placed me. My breath stalled, then found its way again. "I'm here," I said to nobody, or maybe to the trees. The wind held still long enough that my voice went nowhere. Branches shifted in the firs ahead, snow dusted down in a silver spill, and she stepped into view. She came not like a shadow thrown forward, not like a blow. She came like a presence, solid and deliberate, setting each paw exactly where it belonged. Behind her, pushing its muzzle through her leg hair, came the cub, rounder, steadier, eyes open bright and clear. The little one's coat had dried into a soft fuzz, and each step was sure, if clumsy, the way a child's steps are when they've learned balance but not pride. I stood with my hands open, palms up, the only truth I had to offer. She stopped a little way from the edge of the draw and raised her head. Our eyes met. The space between us felt like a bridge made of something I didn't have a name for. Then her gaze loosened, and she turned a fraction, angling her body so I could see the cub more plainly. The cub sniffed, sneezed, shook its head, and blinked at me like I was a strange stump. It made a small sound, less a cry than a chirp, and pressed its side into her leg. She didn't move to block my view. She didn't flatten her ears or lift her lips. She let me look. It hit me then with a clean, soft force that went through skin and bone and landed in the center of me. She hadn't come to warn me away, or to avenge or to test me again. She had come to show me what lived. She came out not to attack, but to show her child was alive. It was her answer. Something in my chest gave way. Not a break, more like a knot untying. I breathed in, and the air tasted like resin and cold water, and I felt tears come the way a thaw comes, slow and certain. I didn't wipe them. I let them track through the grit on my face. Gratitude is a heavy thing. It sits on you until you either hold it or you run. She shifted, and the cub toddled forward a pace, and then another, printing the crust with neat little ovals. Its nose worked, tasting the whole library of my coat: diesel, metal, sweat, pine sap. It was near enough now that I could see the milk-crusted white at the edge of its mouth. She took one quiet step that brought her shoulder between us. No rush, only a line drawn with the gentlest hand, and the little one paused, then bumped its head against her foreleg and settled. The message was plain. Look, but stay where you are. I stayed. We stood like that for several breaths that felt longer than minutes. Wind lifted a sleeve of snow off a high branch, and the crystals drifted down through a shaft of light, bright as sawdust in a sunbeam. The cub watched them fall and tried to catch one with its tongue. I laughed, an honest, startled sound, the first clean laugh I'd made in days, and covered my mouth at once, shocked to hear it. She didn't flinch. Her ear flicked to the sound, then quieted. "I understand," I whispered. "I do." My voice had the roughness of a tool that's done hard work. "Thank you." The words were too small, but they were true. She lowered her head and made that round, hollow sound again, softer now, a kind of humming that seemed to settle the snow. The cub answered with a happy grunt, and for a heartbeat, I felt like I was standing in a doorway to a house where I'd been a stranger and was now allowed to stand on the threshold. I wanted to step forward. Every part of me ached to cross those last few feet and touch the air right beside them. I didn't. I kept the distance she had written on the ground with her paws. Respect, I've learned, is not a feeling. It's a shape you hold with your body. She stared at me one last long time, and in that look, I felt the end of the test. Not a dismissal, a completion. Then she turned, brushed the cub with her foreleg, and the two of them slid back toward the furs. The little one looked over its shoulder and squeaked, as if proud to have an audience, and I grinned like a fool and nodded at a creature that will never know the meaning of a nod. The shadows took them in. Snow brushed itself smooth behind them. The pocket grew quiet again, the good kind of quiet that's full of sleeping breath and safe heat. I stood there until my feet went numb, the hat in my hand, my mouth hurting from a smile I didn't try to hide. I told myself that had to be the last miracle, the final mercy. I thought I'd been given my ending, a message delivered, a life confirmed, a man forgiven enough to go on. I thought the mountain had closed its book on me, that all that remained was the walk down and the weight of a story I would carry like a lit coal. I thought that was the last of it, but ahead waited a finale that would shake me to tears. Spring came late that year, the kind of spring that creeps instead of bursts, that tests every bud before it lets it open. The drifts thinned and glazed, the creeks began to talk again, and the black earth showed through in bruised patches where the sun could finally touch. I told myself I had work to do up there, flagged timber to check, lines to measure. But the truth was simpler. I walked back to that fold of the mountain because part of me had stayed there under the firs, and I could not breathe right until I went to see if the world I had broken was breathing without me. The trail remembered my boots. The spruce remembered my coat. The pocket in the draw was the same as I left it, and not the same at all. The wind passed over the lip and went on its way. The fur that made a green skirt still did, but the snow at its hem was scalloped now, melted and dented and refrozen so many times it looked like old glass. I stood at the edge, hat in my hand again, like a man at a threshold, and I listened for anything that would tell me I had no business there. At first there was only the creek far off, a busy whisper. Then a sound rolled through the trees that I knew before I knew it. Not a warning, not that first, terrible roar. This was a call that named a place and everyone in it. Full, round, certain. It ran across my skin like warm water and set every hair on my arms standing. My breath hitched. My mouth went dry the way it does when a doctor says your name before he tells you the news. I didn't move. I let the sound find me where I stood, and when it faded, I let the silence back in like a guest I had missed. A branch shook. Snow sifted down and flashed in a beam of pale sun, and she stepped out from the fir shade with the slow strength of a tide. She was thinner, the way mothers are after a hard season, but she was whole. Her coat had lost its winter crust and took the light with a dark shine. Behind her, pushing its nose through the hair of her leg like a small boat nosing a harbor, came the cub. Not a baby anymore, not that fragile breath I had felt under the snow, a little bear now, legs wider, head rounder, eyes bright as wet stones. My heart knocked once so hard I thought I would fold. I didn't. I stood, hands open, fingers empty, everything in me saying easy, easy, easy. She saw me. There is no arguing with that part. She saw me, and then she looked at me, the kind of look that makes your bones remember the first time you were ever in trouble and the first time you were ever forgiven. The space between us pulled tight, a wire that hummed without sound. I felt the old fear crouch in me, but a newer thing stood over it and set one hand on its head. I was afraid and I believed at the same time. She angled her body, just a quarter turn, enough that I could see the young one clearly. The cub blinked at me, then at a floating gnat of snow, then back at me as if deciding whether I was a tree that had made a noise. It huffed, pleased with its own breath, and nudged her leg like a child proud to be standing in front of a guest. She did not block my view. She did not lower her ears or raise her lip. She let me see. I did not deserve that gift. I took it with both hands anyway, though my hands were only air. The cub took a few steps toward the edge of the pocket, and she drifted with it, placing herself between us without pressing, as if she could draw a line on the snow with nothing but the idea of a line. I stayed behind that idea. Respect is a shape. I held it with my body. For a long breath, we were a quiet triangle. I could hear the creek again. I could hear my own heartbeat, not like a hammer now, but like a drum under a singer. The cub sneezed, shook its head, and reached its tongue out to taste the light. I laughed once, a small sound that surprised me with how clean it felt. She turned one ear at the sound and then brought it back forward. I felt my knees soften with something I can only call relief. The first time I met her eyes in that torn den, I saw a judge. This time I saw a memory. I do not know how else to say it. She looked at me like a name you keep in your mouth without speaking. Not friend, not enemy. Something held carefully because it once cut, and then stitched. I thought she would keep me there for a while, hang me on that wire until my nerves gave in. I thought she might turn and bed down right in front of me, as if to rub the miracle in, or lead the young one to a patch of open earth and dig to show me soil again. I thought a lot of foolish thoughts while the air moved like a slow wave around us. She took a breath, deep and even, and the whole clearing seemed to match it. Then she did the thing that finished me. She chose the simple thing. She turned away. No fuss, no last sound that said, "Stay back," no big gesture that would let me make a story with easy edges. She turned, brushed her shoulder against the cub, and walked into the trees at a calm pace that made it clear the forest belonged to her, and would always belong to her. The cub hesitated just long enough to look at me with its new boldness, then hustled after her, feet wide, confidence bigger than sense. They vanished into green shade and pale light. A curtain closed without a hand to pull it. I stood there like a man left at an altar, except what I felt wasn't loss. It was completion, and it sent heat up into my face so fast my eyes blurred. She knew me, she remembered me, and she left me standing. That was the trust. That was the final lesson. Not the stare, not the trial, the leaving. That was when it landed, heavy and clean. She had given me the most precious thing she had. She had let me see her child alive and well, and then she had turned her back and gone about her life. She had trusted me with the one thing that mattered, and then trusted me to stay where I should. I had passed a test I never knew how to take, and the grade arrived as silence. My chest hurt like I had been running. My breath came thin. Tears came thick and easy now, warm as bathwater on wind-burnt skin. I didn't wipe them. I let the mountains see. I let the first see. I let myself see. I had spent a lifetime cutting wood and hauling weight and telling myself the world was made of jobs, but there I was, with nothing in my hands and more in my heart than I could carry without setting some of it down. I saw a wild creature thank a man, and I do not believe it happened to me. I stood until the cold reached my ankles and reminded me I was made of meat and time. I put my hat back on, I found the track my boots had made, and I walked out of the draw one careful step at a time. The creek spoke louder as I dropped. A jay scolded and then gave up. Somewhere a woodpecker found a hollow and made a rhythm against it. The world went on, and for once I went on without the itch to hurry. I will not pretend I know what she thinks now when the wind comes down the ridge. I will not pretend I earned anything more than that look and that leaving, but I know this much, and I know it with a steadiness that will outlast me. The wild is wiser than we are, and it remembers. It remembers hurt. It remembers mercy. It remembers the hand that breaks and the hand that clears a mouthful of snow. Some memories are heavy enough to hold a life in place. Hers is. Mine is. And I believe, as surely as I believe spring finds a way even in a stubborn year, that the memory of that day will stay with her as it will stay with me. Not as a story, as a shape in the body, as a way to stand when the wind turns, as a way to choose the simple thing and walk away. If you've also witnessed a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness."